Welcome to the Prancing Skunk podcast. My name is Colleen Sheehan.
I'm Mike Chan.
Strap in, buckle up, and enjoy the ride.
Waiting for Ferraris.
All right, welcome back to our latest episode of the Prancing Skunk podcast. And today I wanted to talk about something a little different. Since my dad has been in the business about 50 years, he's seen a lot of crazy car collections. So today I wanted to talk about some of the craziest collections we've come across, including the infamous Sultan of Brunei's collection. And a lot of people have emailed us and contacted us throughout the years trying to get information on the Sultan's collection, because my dad is one of the only people who has ever been allowed to go there and inspect the cars. So he has a little more in-depth and personal experience with those cars. So how long ago was it when you went and inspected the Sultan's collection?
It was in May 2002, so 19 years ago. The quick story is that the Sultan of Brunei is Brunei is a tiny country. It's about the size of Orange County, but it's sitting on a sea of oil. So the Sultan was once the wealthiest man in the world, and he and his brothers and the nieces and nephews all buy cars. They buy cars like we buy Starbucks. It's meaningless. So they had a compound with about 2,500 cars behind a fish market in Brunei, and in theory the cars were kept there with a huge team of mechanics to maintain the cars. But in 1997 the Asian financial crisis hit, and the Sultan, or his brother at least, went spectacularly bust. When they were audited by Arthur Anderson, they were about 10 billion, with a B, billion, upside down. So everything just stopped. In 2002, I was offered a package of about 15 or 17 cars, including McLaren F1s and F40 LM, lots of very special cars. So in May, I flew to Brunei, and to do that, you fly from LA to Singapore, then Singapore to Brunei. And Brunei is a strange place. When I got on the plane to Brunei, a group of Aussies that were going spearfishing got on the plane with me, and they literally walked down the aisle with their spear guns. And I'm looking at this thinking, whoa. Additionally, Brunei is a Muslim country. There's no alcohol, so you are forewarned, do not take alcohol with you. When we landed, we were picked up by part of their Secret Service who was showing us the collection, and taken to our hotel, which is called the Empire Hotel. And apparently the Sultan's brother, Prince Jeffrey, had spent about $1 billion, with a B, to build a hotel. But it's more than a hotel. It's a hotel, it's a golf course, it's bowling alleys, it's just nuts. When we walked in the lobby, the windows, when you walk in the lobby, you're looking past the lobby at a giant set of windows that were 6 stories tall, 60 feet tall. And the view is just panoramic. You're looking at what I assumed was a harbor, and then the ocean beyond it. And as you're standing there looking out over the lobby, you see oil wells in the distance, and you realize this is where the money comes from. Anyway, the hotel was mind-numbing. We thought there was a harbor with a breakwater in front of the hotel, but once we started to wander around, we realized that it was a swimming pool. The swimming pool was big enough to water ski on. It was nuts. And the swimming pool had a piece of land go out, and at the end of the piece of land there was a structure, and I assumed it was a changing hut or something. And so we wandered out there, and it was a restaurant. There was nobody, there was a full staff, but there was only a couple of people eating.
Yeah, because I have a feeling Brunei is not a super hotspot tourist destination.
Well, there's no alcohol, there's no nightlife. There's virtually no restaurants outside of the hotels, so there's absolutely nothing to do.
Yeah, so to build
Nothing.
$1 billion hotel in
Brunei, in the
Brunei,
jungle.
where nobody goes, is
Well, they have there's a Southeast Asian group of countries that it changes over the years, and they rotate who's running it, and they rotate where they're meeting. So this hotel was built so that once a year they'd have a meeting of all the Southeast Asian countries there.
$1 billion for a once-a-year meeting.
Yeah, and there were people that ran the various oil concessions, Shell Oil and so forth, so they'd be at the hotel. When we were sitting at the pool wondering, wow, how did you ever build this? A group walked by and we started talking to them, and it turns out they were Germans from Lufthansa, and the Sultan had ordered a 747. They had put a custom interior in it, Lufthansa had, and then they'd gone bust, or the Sultan had gone bust. The Brunei investment had gone bust, and so the Germans were there representing Lufthansa, trying to negotiate the right to sell the plane or dispose of the plane or get paid for the plane in some way. And when we went to breakfast, there was actually a couple of dozen people that showed up. This is a hotel with hundreds of rooms, so to go to breakfast and see 24 people, the math doesn't work.
No.
The math doesn't work. Anyway, we finally were taken by our New Zealand secret security guy. He was a New Zealand Special Forces, so he met us in the morning, and we went to look at the collection. And it's essentially it's on the coast, and as you're going down the road, there's a palace, one of the many palaces on the right, and then there's a fish market, and then there was a smaller palace, and we found out later the smaller palace on the left was where the Playboy and Penthouse models lived. So we wish we could have stopped, but we didn't know at the time. When you get to the fish market, it's just bizarre because it's a big wooden rows of tables with a tin roof on it, and the dugout canoes where the fishermen have literally come in with their dugout canoes. At least they have outboard motors on them, and they're selling fish. And then on the other side it's a Playboy mansion, and then on the other side it's a palace. It's bizarre. And as you go through the fish market and you cut around and you start to go back inland, there's a road, and then there's the cement posts in the road, so that you have to weave like this to get to what looks like a maximum security prison. So it's a prison with a giant door.
So they have these chicanes, that way you can't just charge the place.
Right, as if, why would anybody want to charge the place? But anyway.
Well, didn't they have a revolt at some point?
Yes.
So the palace was heavily guarded because the people I don't think they liked the wretched excess of the Sultan while they lived in,
well,
not such nice conditions. I mean, especially when your fish market is next to the dude's palace, every day you have to see his wretched excess.
All of the guards and part of the police force are Gurkhas. The Gurkhas are from Nepal. They were almost all ex-British Army. So they had served in the British Army. They'd put in their 20 or 25 or 30 years. And now they were retired in Brunei, being paid by the Sultan. And they're very, very efficient. They are very efficient. You don't screw with them. The Gurkhas have a very international reputation. So, and they were there because they're hired mercenaries. They are there to protect the Sultan from his people, who, yes, had revolted in the past. Anyway, they opened the gate, we went inside. There was a guardhouse, again run by Gurkhas, and we had to turn in our cell phones, our passports, which was unfortunate. And we were then taken on a guided tour. We made sure we stayed with our guide, one of the Gurkhas, because there were other Gurkhas roaming around with guard dogs, and you didn't want to have an unpleasant meeting with a guard dog.
No.
Anyway, we went through the buildings. There was 8 or 10 massive 30,000, 25,000 foot, 2-story buildings full of cars. And in one building, I remember the air conditioning had taken a crap, and one of the cars parked at the end of the building was under a big air conditioning unit that was leaking water, and it was like a waterfall. It was like you'd turned on the shower on this poor car, and it obviously had been under the shower for a year or two. It's just wild.
Jeez.
I'm still in touch.
And all it would take somebody to just push it out of the way. I mean, they have, I know they don't maintain the cars, but they have people who kind of oversee the collection, right?
All the mechanics were let go. When the collection was active, there were representatives from Pininfarina, from Mercedes, from Ferrari there. You've met the mechanic who was the head of the Ferraris.
Yes.
We've had lunch with him. And
he has some crazy stories about them too.
Yes, he did. But they basically shut it all down about 2000, and he came back to the U.S. and is.
Wasn't he telling us a story when we were at lunch about the Sultan or one of the princes or somebody watched a soccer game, and like the star soccer player, he was like, I want those shoes. And so his the sultans or princes, little secretaries or whatever,
personal assistants
ran out and bought him a pair of those shoes, whatever they were, and brings them back, and the prince or sultan goes, no, I want those shoes
that the star was wearing.
Yeah. And
yeah,
so
that was another lunch with, you remember?
Yeah. And so the people had to figure out how to contact, and they ended up getting him those shoes, but.
Well, the retro access was
Crazy.
pretty wild. There's Jerdong Park, which is sort of a mini
Disneyland.
Disneyland.
Fly people out to
like
play?
Rod Stewart.
Yeah.
Michael Jackson, the list goes on and on. He would literally fly Rod Stewart out to give a little concert for the prince and princesses.
Yeah.
Or fly in, Michael
Whoever.
Jackson to give a performance for, the natives.
Yeah.
Going through the amusement park was just bizarre too. Imagine going to Disneyland where you have the staff maintaining everything, but nobody on the rides. It's just bizarre. Anyway, there's roughly 2,500 cars in the collection. We're still in touch with the man who runs the show, and he's not from Brunei, as you know. He flies in once a year, he has the meeting with them, they discuss all the cars, and nothing happens. The Brunei representatives are basically paralyzed by indecision, and nothing happens. So the cars are still there. And
nobody's maintaining them.
No.
There's no mechanics. There's no. They just sit in these warehouses. And for those who don't know, Brunei is a humid jungle climate. So.
Well, it's Guatemala. It's basically, if you look at it on the globe, it's basically imagine having a warehouse full of cars in Guatemala and the AC fails.
Yeah.
Imagine having a tin roof between two buildings in Guatemala with a couple of hundred cars, and the tin roof leaks, and it's a tropical rainforest, and it rains all the time. So the cars get wet all the time. We often get requests from people who want us to help them buy a specific car, and the people in Brunei have zero motivation to sell. Sometimes the best thing to do is nothing in that political situation. You can't do anything wrong if you do nothing, and so they do nothing.
Didn't you look into one of the cars? Like, I think there was a fleet of Mercedes or something, and you looked inside one and the seats were fuzzy?
No, well, a lot of them had fuzzy seats, but that particular car...
And by fuzzy, I mean covered in mold fuzz.
Yeah, gray mold.
Yeah.
That particular car was a 97-ish Rolls convertible. And it was parked under an overhang, so it wasn't being rained on. And I happened to see it off to a side, and I thought, gee, that'd be fun, right-hand drive, Rolls convertible, whatever. So I wandered over to it, and I opened the right-hand door, which is the driver's door on a right-hand drive car, and it was bizarre because the car had gotten so hot that the foam in the steering wheel had melted, and the leather wrap
It was just
around
kind
the
of
foam.
hanging there without the foam. It all dripped
Yeah,
out.
the analogy I used, it was hanging there like a used condom. It was pretty disgusting. And the leather had gone off. So the entire interior was sort of a fuzzy gray mold. And then there was the steering wheel hanging off of the frame from there was the leather wrap from the steering wheel hanging off of the frame of the steering wheel. And I just thought, wow, if the car was given to me, you couldn't restore it.
Yeah, given to you and like for free, flown and dropped here in the showroom.
Yeah. Another thing that needs to be said is because Brunei is its own little country, they don't have titles because they don't care. You know.
Yeah.
So the cars had no titles.
And who's going to argue with the Sultan about his cars?
Right. So when we were negotiating to buy specific cars, there's no titles. They hadn't been serviced at the time in 2 years. Now it's, 22 years. And the moisture had just done horrible things to them. A bunch of the mechanics were Kiwis from New Zealand. And when they shut down in 97, 98, 99, they were given some cars, 348s and 355s. And so for fun, I followed up back then with the mechanics, and basically the cars were nightmares because of the moisture. Most of the ECUs and electronics had taken a crap. So even though they were given free cars, they had to replace so many electrical components and spend so much time sorting them that it just wasn't worth the brain damage. Additionally, because Brunei is its own little country, all of these cars had no emissions whatsoever. None. So, and because they were right-hand drive, there was only so many markets. They could be sold to England, they could be sold to Ireland, they could be sold to South Africa, a few other places. The problem is, with no emissions, they couldn't be sold to Australia, they couldn't be sold to England. So a lot of the cars were what we called the reef, which meant that their best use was to be dropped into the ocean and form a reef.
Yeah.
If somebody gave you the car, it didn't make sense. The math didn't work.
Now, the higher end cars, though, were kept in a slightly more secure and weatherproof location. They didn't let that happen to McLaren F1s and...
No, actually, you're wrong.
Oh, really?
Yeah, between the row of big buildings, there was what we called the showroom, and it looked like a dealer's showroom. So envision a glass building that's 100 feet long, 30 feet wide. It holds 8 or 10 cars. And in there were the best cars, or some of the best cars. So in there was an F40 LM that had been converted to a street car. There was several McLaren F1s and I think some Bugattis. Anyway, the air conditioning had failed there. So imagine a greenhouse. It was fully glass, and when you walked inside, it was like walking into a sauna. It was overwhelming. Now those cars are worth saving. A carbon fiber McLaren isn't going to rust.
No.
And the interior is pretty minimal to replace. What was also interesting is that there was a collection of what we would call tour buses. These were double-decker buses that were outfitted as party buses. Like if you went to a race, an F1 race, the big tour buses with all the seats and so forth. And they were all right-hand drive. They were built, I think, by British Leyland. And so just for fun, I thought I'd look inside one. So I opened the door on one and held my nose and literally ran inside and ran up the steps to the second level and then ran out, and that was it. I was done. The entire interior was done in yellow and red leather.
That's weird.
Weird. It was set up as literally a rolling bedroom. I'm not making this up. And the leather had gone off. It was like walking through a dump. I mean, the smell, the mold, it was incomprehensible. And I remember discussing it with, there was 3 or 4 of us there. There was Lawrence Stroll's representative was there. I was there. And there was a friend from Australia. And you know, I asked the Aussie what could he do with something like that, and he said if they gave it to you, it would cost more to refurbish than it was worth.
Yep.
And it had no emissions. And what do you do with a double-decker tour bus, right-hand drive, that's been sitting for years in Australia?
Out of the 2,500 cars, because some of the, you know, McLaren F1, certain cars are worth dealing with. You figure out, you know, title issues, you figure out emissions, you figure it out for
Sure.
something worth a certain amount. So out of the 2,500 cars, how many cars do you think hold that kind of value where it would actually be worth trying to do something with? Trying to get out of there.
Depends on the market. For instance, there were...
If it was today, if it was today's market.
Well, for instance, there were some cars I liked. There were a group of 456.
The station wagons.
There were station wagons and convertibles. Like...
They had like shooting brake ones too, right?
Well, okay. Well,
Which, I mean, is a personal taste. I hate the shooting brake style, but, you know, whatever.
There was a couple of buildings that were basically Bentley and Rolls-Royce. In the 80s, Bentley's biggest client was by far the Sultan of Brunei. So there were dozens of Range Rovers that had been rebuilt by Bentley into Bentley station wagons. There were all kinds of custom Bentleys that no one has ever heard of, Javas and so forth. And you can look them up online, just Google Sultan of Brunei Bentleys, and there's endless photos. But what do you do with a limited production, right-hand drive Bentley that has no emission equipment? Where's your market? You know, I can see that there's certainly somebody who'd want a Java, or 2 people, or 3 people, or 4 people, but are there a dozen people who want a right-hand drive Bentley Java with no emissions that's a nightmare?
No.
And there's parts don't exist. If it needs anything, it's going back to Bentley. So there certain cars, for instance, the right-hand drive TRs, those are probably worth digging out because they were in a lower level. They were when I was there, they weren't moldy. They were in a building where the AC worked, and yeah, you're going to drop 10 or 20 or 25 grand into, you know, new tires and all the rubber replaced and new ECUs and so forth. But they're Testarossa convertibles.
Right. No, me saying that means out of all the not all the cars, Testarossas are one of those maintenance whores. They are, in the sense that when you do have to service them, they are extremely expensive compared to similarly priced, similarly aged cars, because you have to drop the whole rear end.
Think of a row of right-hand drive Testarossas. The latest car would be a 97, and something like a 512 TR.
I just think that, you know, even at 25 grand, you're being optimistic on the maintenance on those, because how many times have we had, when we're selling a Testarossa, it's a $20,000 service just in basic,
deferred maintenance.
Deferred
maintenance.
Well,
yeah, stop and think about that for a minute.
I'm thinking more 30 grand at least for maintenance, and then all the other
every
issues
car
that come
would
along
need
with it.
a full set of tires because they're 25 years old. It would need every hose in the car replaced, every water hose, every heater hose, every brake hose. They would need an engine out service. They would need cam belts. You'd have to hope that no moisture got into them. You'd have to hope that they turned over. You'd have to hope that there wasn't rust or corrosion in the cylinders.
Yep.
The leather might be good, it might not. And again, you're talking a Testarossa with no emissions and right-hand drive. So, you know, how limited is the market?
Yeah, I mean, I think something like that would hold decent value if it was here and titled and serviced. God, I don't know what it would be worth, but it would be worth quite a bit just for the history of being a Sultan's car. That
Well, and
holds
they all
value.
have, low or no mileage.
Exactly. It would, how do you drive 2,500 car? They all had no mileage, and it's a one-off custom car. So I think they'd be very valuable if you can get them here. But
Well, what also would help the value is that the Bentleys were all built by Bentley. The Roses and so forth were built by Pininfarina.
well, and there's no question history.
Correct.
I mean, it's nobody's going to argue. So,
Well, looking at that one, for instance, if we had a 512 TR sitting here with a fresh 30, 40, whatever it cost, $1,000 service, there'd certainly be a buyer for a right-hand drive Sultan of Brunei, under 2,500 mile, freshly serviced TR. But what about two? Are there two buyers? Are there 5 buyers? Are there 10 buyers? Are there 15 buyers? I don't think there's 15 buyers.
well, also, that would depend on price.
Yeah.
Because if you have one car sitting here, if you were only able to get one out of there, it would hold a higher price than if you could get all 15.
I don't know how many there were, because there was...
Well, no, I know.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, say there were 15.
Yeah,
if
for a
you,
round number.
If you got all of them out, I think there would be 15 buyers, but the price would have to be less than if you were only able to get one out.
Well, another thing is, for instance, the 456 station wagons. I remember looking at 2 of them. One was black, and all of the windows were treated with a silver tint, so it looked like chrome sunglasses. And I remember looking at that thinking, that looks like a starship. I'd love to have that. But it was parked next to a yellow 456 station wagon, which to me looked like a giant lime. It was horrible. So, the black car with the chrome tint, would sell in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
And the lemon would be, well, a little harder to sell. And a lot of them were in weird colors like green metallic and so forth. And if you find the right guy, there'd be an appeal.
Yeah.
But as I said, I keep in touch with the people there. I've tried to buy the cars. For instance, it'd be fun to try and buy, just as an example, 15 right-hand drive Roses. But how do you arrive at a price? You would get export docs with them. So if you have an export doc, you'd probably be able to get a title eventually. But the bottom line is they won't sell.
No, they won't sell. But if they would, it wouldn't be impossible to export title. It's a process. It's not easy. You pull your hair out trying to do it because everyone is fighting you every step of the way. But it would be possible if they ever decided to sell.
Well, another thing we ran into is shipping. Lots and lots of things go to Brunei. There's lots of containers of TV sets, and they have to import all their food and so forth. But there's nothing that gets exported. The only thing that gets exported is oil. So the logistics of shipping the cars was also problematic because they just don't have the same type of dockland service we do. Additionally, as we toured around Brunei, there were other weird things. For instance, boats. I remember being taken to a wharf with a covered dock area, and there was a couple of offshore, what we would call cigarette boats, with, I don't remember what they had, probably twin 454 Chevys or Lamborghini engines or some such thing. But the punchline is, there was nobody to negotiate with. There was no way to establish a price. As I said earlier, the mid-level officials that are in charge work under the philosophy that if you don't make a decision, you can't make a mistake. So I will pretty well guarantee if I went back there today, the little boatyard with the offshore boats is still sitting there.
Yeah.
If I went back today, I'm pretty sure the right-hand drive Rolls with the moldy interior is sitting there, and it's only gotten worse.
Yeah. Well, I'd imagine, anything, like maybe somebody tries hard enough to get a McLaren F1 or something out of there because those hold significant value, so it would be worth a serious amount of brain damage to try and buy one of those.
But it doesn't work that way. What you have to do is you have to have a connection with one of the members of the royal family.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
No, I mean, Joe Blow can't just
Yeah.
call up the Sultan and be like, hey, that's not how it works. But if you do, if it was you and a buyer came to you and said, I am dedicated to buy this McLaren F1.
I've tried.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. They're paralyzed me into. I've dealt with the bank that handled the restructuring of their loans. Again, they didn't want to be bothered with cars. They just didn't. Think about it. If you're.
They got bigger problems.
Yeah, the bank was dealing with basically a $10 billion problem. And
so a couple million in cars is not on their radar.
It's meaningless. They just don't care.
Yeah.
They just don't care. So I imagine if I went back, it might be doable, but so far I haven't found any easy access. And if you go back, think about this. There's 2,500 cars for a round number. So going back and wanting to buy 15 Tetsu Roses as an example, they don't want to talk to you. Mm-hmm. They either want a resolution or will do nothing.
Yeah.
And buying 15 Tetsu Roses at some number isn't a resolution. No.
That's a headache to them.
It's a headache, sure.
A nuisance, yeah.
Yeah, it's like negotiating to buy, the hood latch on this Porsche. We don't want to sell the hood latch.
Yeah.
You want to buy the Porsche? Buy the Porsche. Yeah, no.
You don't? Then
yeah,
leave
we
us
don't.
alone.
We're not in the hood latch business.
Yeah.
And for them, we're not in the 15 TR business.
Yeah.
So.
Makes sense.
No. And so we move on.
Yeah.
But as I said, I do keep in touch. Every 90, 120 days I follow up, and every 90 or 120 days it's the same thing.
For the last 20 years.
20 years.
Yeah. Well, on the subject of crazy collection, so the Sultan's collection is definitely one of the most famous oddball collections, simply because of not just the sheer amount of cars, but the secrecy. Hardly anyone's ever seen it. There's not really that many photos out there.
And the total outrageous, wretched excess of it all.
Yeah.
There's nothing like it.
Yeah.
There are some very, very spectacular collections that we've gone to see, most of which we can't discuss. And most of them are 20 cars or 50 cars or 75 cars or 100 cars.
But it's also 20 or 50 of the best. We're talking a couple 100 million in a few cars. So one of them we can talk about because it's a public collection is the swap shop.
Yes, the swap shop.
We went 2 years ago now, I think.
Well, I went with you 2 years ago, but I've been going there since the 90s.
Yeah.
And for instance, we sold Preston Henn, the owner of the swap shop, an F50 back about 1997 or 98, and then we bought it back from his estate about 2 years ago. 2 years ago. So there's a real collection. Anybody can visit it. It's in Florida. And
right sitting in the middle of the, America's largest swap meet is a 275
GTBC.
That's God knows what it's actually worth. It is arguably the most expensive car in the world, or at least the most expensive Ferrari in the world. It's worth more than a 250 GTO, if you can imagine it. 250 GTOs have sold quietly in the last few years for over $75 million.
Well, there's one for sale, as we both know, for $75 million right now.
Yeah. So if GTOs are $75 million, I would assume that the
GTBC
is 80.
Who knows?
Yeah, who knows until it actually sells. But
yeah.
If I had to guess, I'd say 80 is a safe enough number. Mm-hmm. There's an $80 million car sitting in the middle of a swap shop, surrounded by little kiosks selling cell phone covers and trinkets and knockoff shoes that look like Gucci shoes and just stuff.
Yeah. Well, for instance, if you walk into the central area, the GTBC is usually in the center, and then there's the Daytona Spider, and there's the F399.
The
and
Testarossa that was in Miami Vice,
Yeah,
and the
they're all there.
TDF, and
How many cars? You were there with me most recently. How many cars do you think are there now? 50-ish?
yeah, ish. Because there's the like corral where the GTPC was, along with the TDF, the F1 car. There was probably 8 to 10 cars in that little corral. Mm-hmm. And then there was the
Which
separate.
which totaled in value something well over $100 million.
Yeah. $100 million sitting in the middle of a swap shop.
Yeah.
And it's funny because you see a lot of people walk by, and it kind of made me giggle because I'm like, these are obviously not car people.
Yes.
Because there was the people who would stop at the fence and take photos and ooh and ah over the cars. But then there was the people who would walk on by to, go get their Annie's pretzel or whatever from the little stand along the way. And you're like, you just walked past $100 million and didn't even glance at it. And that's just because they don't care about cars, which is fine. It's not their thing. But, they had no idea what they
None.
were walking past. Mm-mm. To them, it was just a display.
Yeah. Well, a swap shop is basically a low-income destination.
Well, yeah, any swap shop is, it's where you buy stuff. If you need, whatever, some summer dresses and a belt and maybe a plant, a new house plant and
it's there at the swap shop.
Whatever you need. It was the honest
And anybody
place.
can see the collection. I don't remember how much it is, $5 or $10 to get in, and another $5 for parking. And you can walk around and look at all of the cars.
Yeah.
And we've dealt with them for 25 years. Every once in a while they do sell, but
They're hard.
whoa, they are hard work.
Yeah.
They are hard work. And just because you're willing to pay a market price or a more than market price, they simply don't need the money. They don't care.
Yeah. If you get them on the right day at the right price in the right mood, then you can buy something. And if
Maybe.
not, maybe. And
Yeah.
if not, then, try again later.
Well, think of all the cars and all the offers we've made over the last year.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. But, at least they're pleasant to deal with.
Yes, and always interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
Always interesting.
That's the fun part about our job. A lot of times, it's an interesting experience. It just because we've been to so many collections where it's your typical beautiful garage, warehouse, whatever, where everything is perfectly maintained and shiny and, just on the trickle charger and wonderful. And that's great and all.
With the staff that maintains the car, with
yeah.
the barista, with the kitchen, with the dining area, their car guy caves.
Yeah, and that's it's always awesome to see that. I'm not taking it for granted, but at the same time, that is common, whereas stuff like the swap shop is not so common. There's some collections that are just held differently that make them so interesting, like the one you were talking about with the literal man cave.
Yeah. We have a client who's an Italian client who lives just across the border in Chiasso, and I drove up from Milan with him one time to his house, and we turned off the highway once we were in Switzerland and went on to a small road. Then we went into what I would call at best a country road, a bumpy dirt road, and suddenly there was a gate, and he pressed the button in his car and the gate opened, and we drove through the gate and we drove into what looked like a rock wall, and as we curved around I realized there was an opening, and his house was built literally into the mountain, and his car collection was built facing it. So there was sort of an opening with house on one side, car collection on the other. And again, he pressed little buttons on his car and the doors opened and we went inside. And there's the 250 GTO and the 250 GTO and the 250 TR. And, they're all there.
But built into a mountain.
Built into a mountain. I never drive. I literally, when we got onto this little country road, I thought for a minute, where the hell are we going? And then there was a gate, and we went inside. And then I thought, well, we're driving into a mountain. And there was an opening, and we went inside. And we sold him a bunch of cars in the late 80s and early 90s, and he still has them. Hasn't sold anything. Every once in a while he buys a new car, you know, a LaFerrari or whatever. But all of the, we'll call them the Enzo era cars, the GTO and the TR and so forth, haven't moved in years. Don't, you know, and they don't go out, they don't go to events, they don't go to shows.
Yeah.
They're just in his little mountain cave. So there are collections everywhere. Most of them, as you know, we can't talk about, or certainly talk about. Like for instance, if you say a GTO, you've narrowed it down to roughly 39 cars.
Yeah.
You know, so you can kind of guess.
Well, you know, a lot of people are very private, and you can't blame them. You know, especially with that kind of money sitting there, they don't want, you know, people knowing.
Well, his uncle was kidnapped, and they had to buy him back minus an ear.
Ooh.
Yeah, I don't think you knew that.
No, I hadn't.
No, so
I hadn't heard that one.
yeah, so the security was kind of interesting.
I bet.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh well, it's always interesting when you go somewhere with security. Like when we went, you and I went down to San Diego, the underground car collection.
Oh yes.
Which was interesting. I mean, it wasn't, you know, it probably doesn't even make the top. The house makes the top 10 I've ever seen. The garage, top 20.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, it was a cool garage. So imagine you pull up and there's like a 4-car upper garage. You're like,
Well, first
okay.
of all, you have to say that you're on a road.
Okay, so the whole experience, I pull into this gate, into an area where I thought I was lost. I was like, am I? So it looked more like the entrance to a kind of one of those like hotels that's very sprawling with little bungalows. Like I thought, because there's all these roads that shoot off different places, and I'm like, oh, I don't think we're at a house. I think we just wandered into like a country club entrance or like something. And so there's all these gardeners
And
running
you
around.
forgot the barn with the mini horses.
Yeah, but we didn't see that yet because we had taken a wrong turn and
Right.
found the barn with all the little horses, which was awesome. But so I stopped and asked one of the gardeners, I'm like, hey, how do I get to the main house? And he goes, oh, just follow this road past the pool bridge and you'll hit the house. And I'm like, pool bridge? Okay, sure. So we head on, and there's all these waterfalls and statues 15 feet tall and just craziness. Following this winding road for a couple minutes, and in the distance, I see this massive like structure with a waterfall off the end into a koi pond. The size, you know, I mean, it's the size of. It was giant. It was a lake. It was a koi pond lake.
Yeah.
And I'm looking
Yes.
at this, and I realized what we're driving up to was a pool way up high with a bridge, the driveway underneath it. I'm like, oh, that's what a pool bridge is.
Yes.
And so we drive underneath the pool, and
Well, the house was built on a hill, so as the hill rolled off, the pool went out straight, so they had a bridge under the pool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So drive up to the house, and I mean it was palatial. It was awesome.
Yes.
But the garage there's just a 4-car garage up top like normal, and then there was an entrance to an underground garage that was 2 levels, and it was it was all cement and modern. You know, the polished cement floor with the cement walls and ceiling, lots of lights, and then it just you know, like a long ramp with parking off to the side. So it was nice, but not, it was spectacular. It just did, you know, compared to.
And it had what we'd call the contemporary car collection.
Yeah,
so it started
LaFerrari,
with the
F40,
LaFerrari
F50.
Aperta and the LaFerrari and the Enzo and the F40 and the F50 and the 288, you know,
Yeah.
all the way down. And then there was one token old car, which is a 275 GTS.
Oh, you can't forget the Fiat Jolly.
And the Fiat Jolly. You have to have a token Fiat Jolly.
Of course. Otherwise, what are you doing?
Yes.
Well, hey, you know, you could have a golf cart or a Jolly.
Yeah, the swap shop has a, how would you describe their golf
Oh,
cart?
they decked it out with Ferrari banner.
Well, with Ferrari banner and sort of clown banner.
Yeah, well, yeah, like
Yeah.
jokingly, yeah.
And at the swap shop, almost everything is painted yellow. which
Yeah,
is
he liked
really
yellow.
weird. Really weird.
Yeah, he took the F50 we sold him and
Painted
painted
it yellow.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So, hey, he liked yellow. Whatever. To each their
The
own.
only significant car there that wasn't yellow was the F399 Formula One car.
Yeah, and if he painted that yellow, he'd have that's that taboo.
Yeah.
Blasphemous.
Uh-huh.
You don't paint because it was Schumacher era.
It was a
but-
Schumacher car.
Yeah, he had driven it, but it had been wrecked, or the nose got broken off, so it couldn't be driven anymore. So while it's a real Schumacher car, it's now never trackable.
Right, it's a display car.
Yes.
A multi-million-dollar display car.
Yeah.
And when Ferrari sold it, because it had been crashed before and the tub wasn't that
They took
stable,
the
all the
ECU.
electrics were out of it. All of the engine management electronics were gone. And all of the electronic management interconnect between the tranny and the engine were gone. So bottom line is it was never going to run again. But it sure
Right.
looks nice.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah, there's no lack of crazy collections we've seen, but that's the fun part about this job. It's just all the things you wouldn't expect to come across either, you know?
Well, one of the standard lines I hear when we're looking at these collections is if you take photos, I have to kill you.
Yeah.
And if you talk about what's here, I have to kill you.
Yep. Yeah. Some people are, well, I mean, hey, if they're in that league where they're worried about an uncle getting kidnapped and losing an ear,
Yeah.
I'd be pretty private too.
Yes.
I think I would be on the same mindset, so it's understandable.
Yep.
And, gotta respect their privacy, so.
And if you're into airplanes, some of what we do is a lot of fun. For instance, with that client, I flew into Geneva, and he and his pilot picked me up in their Citation so that we could fly across Switzerland and land next to the Challenger. And then that was a different time, and look at the car collection. So I've been there multiple times.
Yeah.
But I like being picked up by private jets.
You
of
just
course.
like airplanes.
I like airplanes.
See, that's where you and I differ.
Yeah.
I'm indifferent. They are a mode of transport. You
Yeah.
know, you subscribe to all the airplane magazines.
Yep.
Well, I think that's a good place to wrap it up for today. But let me know in the comments if you guys have anything in particular you want to hear us talk about, any certain subjects, anything like that. And then if you haven't heard our old podcasts, we've done, I don't know, I think 3 other ones now, talking about racing and just, I don't even remember. Go ahead.
Well, this is going to be our next podcast.
I think that's going to be a YouTube video. Well, we'll see.
We'll see.
We'll see. But all right, well, if you guys haven't already subscribed to our channel, please do, and hit the like button, comment, and because it really does help the algorithms and all that if you interact. So let me know what you guys want to hear more of, and I will try and make it happen. Until next time, talk to you then.